I am joined by Robert Griffin III, James White, Field Yates Meanakeims.
All right, so first play we're going to look at 2nd and 2, one of the Patriots' first offensive plays.
What's going on, everyone? Tayler Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at PrizePicks. And today, I am joined by friend of the show, Cody Alexander, the owner of MatchQuarters and host of the Let's Talk Ball podcast. Cody, I told you you're one of my favorite guests because I always love this time of the year trying to get a little bit ahead in what the league trends are going to be, and also just getting your perspective on how the Patriots were the season before and maybe how they're starting to look as things pick up. So thank you, as always, for coming back on the show. Before we get into the football, though, we switch things up a little bit. So now in the intro, we like to see what our guests have been watching, whether it's TV, whether it's movies, just to get an idea of what you could maybe put us on to or the audience. So I know you're a very busy man, but are there any shows or movies that you would recommend for me in the audience?
Man, I've been watching Tires on Netflix.
Yep. Shane Gillis.
So that's funny. I don't watch a lot of TV. Just because I'm doing football stuff all the time, because I'm literally like a meme of a person of like obsessed with football. I've been doing a lot of reading lately, though. I read Matthew McConaughey's Green Lights. I thought that was really interesting too. So that's kind of the two things that I'm kind of bouncing around between.
What's that about? Because Matthew McConaughey is like one of the most fascinating human beings walking the face of this planet.
Yeah, I wish I had his courage, man. I mean, like he too, I think he's like the quintessential like anti-Hollywood guy. And he's been that way really since the 90s. Like, this is a guy that literally, like, he hit it real big, and then he took all that money and he bought an Airstream and then traveled to all 49 states and was just driving around. Yeah. And it's crazy, the stories that he has in there about how the people he met. I mean, there was an opportunity probably in the 90s and early 2000s before he was like really, really big, to where you could have been at an RV park in some random spot in America and he would have been right there with you.
Red-blooded American. That is awesome.
Yeah. He is Texas through and through, born in Uvalde, grew up in Longview. I mean, like, dude, he's definitely a Texan. For sure.
Sick. All right. We've never done reading recommendations, but now we might have to open the book up on that, because that is a good one. And now this is actually the time where I try to catch up on some reading. I average like 4 books a year, and all of them are right now. So I'm going to add that one to the list. Thank you, brother. But
yeah, no problem.
Of course, we are here to talk some football. That's your specialty, my specialty. So let's get into it. Starting with the Patriots, going to briefly talk about last season. There was a whole lot of bad. We all know that. But I'm curious, from your perspective specifically, what did you think this team really needed to fix coming into 2025 under this new Mike Vrabel regime? And how do you feel that they've actually addressed some of those more significant and big holes on their roster, and really also philosophically?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to me was just secondary play was just inconsistent last year. The defense just in general was not very good, I think, all around. But I think a lot of it, you can be poor in the run game as long as you're not the Carolina Panthers. You can be poor in the run game and still relatively be successful. But when you just don't have that passing game, which was always one of the things, and I know it's hard for Patriots fans because, like, for essentially a generation, this was a top 10 defense, may not have had a bunch of all pros. And we've talked about this before of like, I think we talked about this last year, like, what's it going to be like losing Belichick? But that to me is the biggest thing. It's just, you kind of had this cratering. I think the roster got old. They had some injuries in the back end. To me, the core group is there. Having Christian Gonzalez, I think, is fine. I'm a fan of Marcus Jones. He's kind of a man-dominant corner. They did go and get the Craig Woodson kid, who I think it looks like they're going to try him at some nickel. Kyle Duggars, to me, is kind of like, he's got to figure out if he's going to be Jeremy Chin or not. Right? I think the Commanders found out last year with Chin that you can have a really big box guy, but trying to play a lot of too high shell stuff with him just doesn't necessarily work. Duggar, to me, is going to have to kind of, that's the guy. If I'm going to worry about one guy in the back end, it's going to be, where is he going to fit within this scheme? Vrabel, which I'm sure we'll get into, but Vrabel with Shane Bowen, who's now with the Giants, was very much quarter dominant. Denard Wilson took that and ran with it last year as well a little bit, wanted to do a lot of pressing with the Titans just because that was what was on the roster as well. So I'm a big fan of Jabrill Peppers and kind of as that kind of guy that literally can do anything in the back end, and you can play him high, you can play him low. He's really he's really progressed, because if you remember, he was a box safety.
Yeah.
Coming out of college, and he kind of got stuck in that system with the Browns, where he was essentially at 30 yards deep every single play.
That was it, where you couldn't see him even with the all 22. You're like, that's a person.
Yeah, why are we playing with 10? Oh wait, the guy's off the camera. Yeah, so to me, he's progressed, but it's like with Duggar, essentially what you have is 2 box safeties as your deep safeties. That's going to be that. I love the pickup of Carlton Davis. That fits right in with what Vrabel wants to do, which is essentially, now I have 2 press corners. We can play man outside. We can play corners. We can play match 3. We can do a bunch of different things with the defense. So to me, with the secondary, it's more or less like, let's regroup, because everything kind of cratered. If I see potential problems, it's going to be in that safety room of just like, I believe in Peppers. Can Duggar kind of ascend to be a little bit more than just kind of a box safety?
Absolutely. And it's funny because safety this year, it feels like they do have better depth now that they've got Woods and they add Marcus Epps. Jalen Hawkins has actually been more – a lot of it's because Kyle Duggar's not been participating in the spring. But you saw a lot of Jalen Hawkins, and then Jabrill Peppers kind of got into the mix. But I'm curious, because as a free safety, I feel like Jabrill Peppers is a lot better than he gets credit for. And, fans around here are always saying, we need a free safety. We need a free safety. And I'm saying, well, Peppers is a great, big nickel corner, and you like him in the box in certain matchups, but he is a smaller guy, so he's not like Duggar, where he can kind of live in the box and you don't mind because he's big enough and he's physical enough. But Peppers, especially in obvious pass situations, put him in the back end, because I like how he can cover ground and he's very cerebral. So how do you feel about him in that deep post spot? And what would you maybe like to see from the future from whoever becomes that really go-to post safety for New England?
Yeah, that's going to be the key. He is really good in the intermediate. We know of him as, hey, he's one of the better pass rushing or blitzing safeties. He's really good against the run. And again, it goes back to that concern, like we were talking about, of the fact that you really have 2 box safeties, or down safeties is really what they are called now. So how is that going to then progress? Because that's what you need. You really need somebody, which if you go and you look at like a guy like Marcus Epps, is kind of in that hybrid shell, played a lot back. Jalen Hawkins playing in under Duggar. Hopefully these guys are guys that can play up and back. That's what you want in the modern game. That's really, speaking of trends, everybody, even some of these guys that were very much like we run kind of, one thing, are trying to find more ways to play from a 2 high shell, because there is not a defensive coordinator in the NFL scared of a 4-yard run. And we can do some things structurally where we can set that up for the safeties. We know these guys can play down. Can they play back? But in terms of what are we looking for from the now modern free safety, is a guy that can play from depth, play on top of a receiver, has some tools in him. The center field safety is dead. The Sean Taylors and the Ed Reeds, those guys don't really exist in football anymore. It's very hard to find a guy who is comfortable living in the middle of the field and can go sideline to sideline. Those guys, and 2, that it's kind of one of those deals of like, why do we have a bunch of running quarterbacks or mobile quarterbacks? Well, that's because what was asked at the high school level, people just said, why don't we just put our best athlete at quarterback? He handles the ball. College then goes, well, we have all this space on the field. If we have a running quarterback, we don't have really good offensive lines. He can now run. And then now we can actually design runs for him, mess with it well. And then, so NFL, who are the only quarterbacks available for them to take? Mobile quarterbacks. And so it's kind of part and whole of like where we are training wise. Well, it's the same way on defense, of where we really don't have these guys that are supplanted in the middle of the field, are super cerebral. Palomalu is another example of a guy that can literally just play in the back end and move around, and he's kind of like that mosquito, and it's just annoying. You just don't have those guys anymore. These guys are at being asked to do more. Can you play near the box? Can you play from depth? And now for the free safety position in particular, or that kind of cover safety or deeper safety, you've got to be able to play man. You've got to be able to cap verticals. You have to be understand what you're doing in all these different coverages, because people are getting more and more multiple to handle these offenses.
It's funny because when you say that, it reminds me of Marte Mapu, funny enough, because he's a guy where kind of coming in the league, I was hoping he could do a lot, but then when he was asked to do everything, felt like it was too much on his plate. I was kind of thinking, all right, maybe you just put a little bit less, because with a lot of these guys, it's hard to be good at any one thing when
Yes.
you are asked to constantly line up in all these different positions. So I'm actually kind of curious now. You're familiar with Craig Woodson. Where do you think he'd be best? Because he's a guy who spent most of his career at Cal in the box, really playing more towards the field. And then his last season was more of a free boundary safety where he's handling communications. He is in center field more, but still is a guy who lined up all over the place. So is there a specific role that you think he'd be best in? Or do you think because he came from that system, he is a more natural fit being a bit of a chess piece?
Yeah, I think that's what you want to look at when I'm going with college guys, is what kind of system are they coming from? That Cal system is very much a cover 3 dominant system. And so, okay, one year he was down safety. The next year they probably lost somebody, needed another guy that, hey, you're our best athlete. You can do some different things. Let's put you back. And what you want nowadays, that's what you want. You are trying to find guys that can play down and can play back. And when you have that on there, now it opens up a lot of things. I mean, we're trying to find, I'd say we as like defensive coaches now, especially in the NFL, are trying to find guys. The problem you want to have is, okay, he can play nickel, he can play our down safety, he can play our deep safety. Oh, that's not a problem anymore. That's okay, now we can shift him over. Maybe he does play. Because, I mean, look, we go back to it again, like Peppers and Duggar didn't play the full season last year.
Right.
I think Peppers didn't even have 400 snaps on defense last year. Okay, well, it's a game of attrition. This guy can snap back if we need it. If now teams are trying to figure out, we need to have a bigger body at the nickel position. We can't just have a third corner. Okay, well, maybe we don't need to run out Marcus Jones as the nickel all the time and have people getting 12 personnel and now run the ball at him. Now I have to get into base. Now I'm in a predictable situation. Maybe they have a good tight end that my linebackers can't match up with. So to me, having a guy like that, of where, hey, we can kind of experiment and put him in different places. We saw this with the Eagles with Quinion Mitchell. Remember, when DeJean wasn't there, they said, what if we throw him in at nickel to see what happens? Okay, it didn't work out. He's an outside corner. Problem solved. DeJean was an awesome slot. We kind of all knew that would be a great position for him. But now we're hearing, okay, hey, he's going to play a little bit more outside because he also is a really good corner. Devin Witherspoon, another nickel. And I'm using these nickel corners because it's typically where you see it. There's just not a lot of safeties that are full-time. Like Brian Branch is pretty much. Kyle Hamilton is another where I'm really a deep safety, but I can I can kind of come down moonlight as a nickel. Devin Witherspoon's another example of, okay, I'm a bigger body corner. I can now roll inside and outside. So when you have these smaller corners, you need a big nickel. The big nickel, it's so funny because 10 years ago, you can Google it, big nickel. And there was an article written on NFL.com like 10 years ago, like big nickel's back. Well, guess what? All right. Guess what? I wrote an article last year about, hey, the big nickel's back because everybody's searching for that third safety because it just opens a lot of different packages. Remember, we're talking about defenses where we want to be able to have schematic fluidity, where I can go from base to big nickel to maybe even a dime, and I'm not reteaching a bunch of different things, because if I'm whittling the playbook down, the offense knows that. So when I go into that package, they know, okay, here's the set of 10 things that these guys are going to do. Okay, here's our beaters for all of those things. This is now, so you don't want to give the offensive coordinator that ability to do that. That's why these hybrid players are so important right now.
And I know I even did my version of the big nickel about Kyle Duggar, and now he was kind of the queen on the chessboard, where you're like, yeah, you can line him up pretty much everywhere, and it still is an advantage. And I was worried that the big nickel was kind of going to go away because Mike Vrabel really didn't have that, because his slot corners were usually guys who were about like 185, 190
Right.
pounds. He didn't need to sub them off. But with Marcus Jones, I'm like, all right, he's probably the best run defending corner they have, ironically, but he's
Yes.
small. So I was kind of wondering, and Elliot Wolf told us, yeah, no, we're still going to be using a lot of those 3 safety looks. I even found out last year, and I love this. The safeties, when they are in those looks, they just say, hey, what are you comfortable with? If there's a guy who's not very good at free safety, but he's really good in man, that guy's like, all right, I'll just go, man-to-man coverage. Because some guys, like younger players, aren't as cerebral. Some guys just aren't really, like if Jabrill Peppers, you'd rather have him on the back end than covering a 6'5" tight end. He's still a very good player, but there is a mismatch. So that versatility in the way they've done it is going to be a really cool thing to see carry over. But then that's kind of segueing me into the next part of this conversation, which is the schematic differences we're going to see under Mike Vrabel. Now, we do know he wants to play man coverage. I ask because the quarters is what he's mostly played, not a lot of man, but he has when he had the personnel. And he's like, yeah, I want to play cat coverage. You got this cat, I got that cat. Like he knows where the strength of his roster lies. But we are going to see more quarters, right? So it's not going to be the cover 3 dominant and then cover 2 as the switch up. We'll see that. Still a lot of cover 3, but a lot more quarters and more of an attacking 4-3 under front instead of the more gap occupying 3-4 defense that we're used to seeing from the Patriots. So can you do a better job than I could ever do of explaining what those changes mean? Why are they maybe going to be using more quarters? And what is the difference between a 4-3 under attacking front versus that more gap clogging 3-4 that Patriots fans are used to?
Yeah, the big asterisk before we get going is the fact that cover 3 is still the number 1 coverage in the NFL. It's probably never going to go away from that. Even though we are having higher levels of quarters, it's getting bled out a little bit because of the Fangio, kind of the Fangioification of the NFL of where we're getting now. I call them targeted coverages where we can roll the cover 2 side to the passing strength or away. So your old school cover 6, so your quarter half. A lot of teams still, that's the only way that they get a true split field defense is from that quarter half. Well, the Fangio system allows you to then pivot that and say, hey, we'll put the cover 2 side to the nickel. We'll have a cover 4 side, which allows you to kind of play with that boundary safety, kind of do some different things with him. So I think though we are not seeing quarter levels have pretty much stayed stagnant, that's but we're bleeding out some of these other things from we're adding more cover 6 elements, right? The target coverage, we're adding a little bit more of these palms elements. Palms is basically to read. These cover 2 elements as well from it. People are shifting to more non-traditional Tampas, meaning that the mic isn't just running the pole. So to me, the biggest difference here is the movement of the front structure from an odd front to more of a 4-down front. I think it actually fits with the personnel. I think if you go and you look at kind of who they got, you still have a 3-4 element. And I think if you give them a 13 personnel which is 1 running back, 3 tight ends, or you get into a 21, you're really a 21 personnel non-Shanahan team where they're going to move those guys around. Okay, we can get into a 3-4. But that under front, that's the key that you mentioned. An under front is essentially an odd front masquerading as an even front because you're really able to have, and Pete Carroll's the one that kind of made that Leo position famous, which is essentially your jackbacker or the one edge that you have out there. I think if you look at the roster and you really take a look at it, Harold Landry is probably, and then Anfrey Jennings will be kind of your edges, right? But you still have a guy like Milton Williams who's going to be a 3-tech. I like Christian Barrymore as kind of that hybrid. He can play nose. He can also kind of move out of there. And then Keon White, to me, he's a 4-3 guy. Right. But he's got the ability to then be able to, if we want to stand him up and drop him, we can. If we want to add some of these kind of simulated pressures, meaning that we're going to blitz, but we're only going to rush 4, we can drop him out. He can move in on packages. So I really think they're going to say, hey, base, when we put our depth chart out, it's going to say 3-4, which a lot of these NFL guys do. But hey, we're going to primarily be out of an even front when we get into the season, which is what Vrabel traditionally has wanted. When you look back at what he did with the Titans.
And what I love is usually with the 4-3, it's really, I don't want to say a limitation of your roster, but traditionally those defensive ends are guys you don't want standing up, like a Keon White type, where he's 285 pounds. Those guys should not be dropping into coverage. But when you have a Harold Landry, a Keon, and it's actually been those two as the starting edges, which was a little bit surprising to me because I thought it would be Anthony Jennings on early downs, then maybe Keon White or Caleb Chase on mixes in. Jennings has been lower on the depth chart than I imagined. It's really been Harold Landry and Keon, and then Landry coming out for Caleb Chase on, another guy who puts his hand down and rushes a lot. So how do you feel about that grouping? And also Christian Barmore, from what I've seen, sliding into more of that Jeffrey Simmons role, because like you said, he's not just a defensive tackle. He's going to kick outside of offensive tackles as well.
Yeah, I think having a guy that can play nose to all the way to what I call a big five. You saw this last year with the Seahawks and Leonard Williams. What was really interesting, and I'm seeing this more, is within these packages. So having a guy like Keon White makes sense. If we're going to run an underfront, we're going to have a B-gap bubble typically. He's big enough to handle and compress that bubble. So we're not losing anything by having two edges. You get into that problem. Like if you were to watch the Chargers last year, a lot of their nickels they have Mac, Khalil Mack and Bosa, but they were really stand-up edges. But then you put these two huge noses, you Tier Tart and Puna Ford in the middle. And so you're just like, we're going to two-gap this thing and keep everybody free. Well, what you got and what you see, and to me, all these guys watch each other. And one of the guys that a lot of people are watching it is Mike McDonald, because of how he was able to rebuild the Ravens, and then kind of what he was able to do with the Seahawks last year and the restructuring of that. Well, moving Leonard, hey, if we're going to have a smaller nickel out there, we can move Leonard Williams out as kind of a big five and really create a wall so that nickel, we can kind of keep him in coverage. Well, having Keon White as your big five and then Landry, Harold Landry as your edge or jack allows you now to get into that, under front. If we need to move over, now we have two guys in the middle that can play a G technique, meaning I'm on the inside of the guard, and then a 3 technique, which means I'm now on the outside, which is really literally a shade difference, right?
No.
So the position is essentially the same. I don't need a guy on the center controlling the middle of just kind of like, I'm going to be this lug. You got to triple team me. So to me, when you look at the roster, it makes sense that it's actually like that. Like I said, the depth chart is going to come out and it's going to be a 3-4, but really what you're seeing at camp and what you're seeing from everybody is that we're really going to be a 4 down. And this is kind of we're setting it up with a lot of these hybrid players that we have up front.
And then unlike those other kind of Belichickian fronts where Devon Godshaw is there, and he's going to play a lot because he is that space-eating nose tackle, now they've got like a Kairos Tonga who's more in that role. He'll come in when they want to go 5 down and say we need that guy who's going to free up everybody else. But they don't need to because they have that 2-eye. So instead of the nose where he's over the center, kind of attracts those doubles, the 2-eye, it's a little bit more advantageous. It's harder to get 2 guys on him. That's where you'll see sometimes Milton Williams, sometimes Christian Barmore, sometimes Keon White, but guys where it's a better position, or like a Joshua Farmer, that's where he played really in college, the 3 technique and the 2-eye, where technically it's more like kind of smaller athletic players, but when you do have the ability to at least insert somebody, eat up that space with the structure of the front, it helps out a ton. And obviously, I could talk about front structures all day with you, but I do have to shine a little bit of a light on Christian Gonzalez because we've kind of talked about him. But when it comes to players like him, it's hard to see where the next step is because you rarely see them make mistakes. You really only hear their name when they're doing something good. But from what you've seen in his tape, after being a second-team All-Pro last year, what's the next step that Christian Gonzalez needs to take in his development so that he can be in that first-team All-Pro conversation? And it's not, oh, yeah, Christian Gonzalez is top 5, because in New England, you say top 5 with Gonzalez, and it's like, whoa. No, maybe shrink that down a little bit because I don't know about 5 corners that are better, but how can he maybe become that unarguable number 1 corner?
Yeah, he just needs consistency. I mean, you go and you look at his games from last year, he had really good games versus like the Colts, San Francisco, the Bears, Arizona, Seattle. Then you go and you look and like his worst games, he's the Chargers, the Jets, the Jaguars, Tennessee. Okay, that alarm, but wait a second. The Jaguars and Tennessee, wait a second. Like what? So to me, it is the reason why he was second team All-Pro, and a lot of people think, because he shows up. And that's part, like, he shows up for these big games, right? But what about when we are playing, some of these lesser teams? Are you showing up consistently? To me, if you look at it, I think that's the only thing you're asking for, is become that professional now, right? Look, now's the time to come in, be a professional. You're going to play a 17-game season. You're going to be good for at least 15 of them, right? We all have bad games. And I don't think that that's fair to say of like, you can't have one bad game, but that consistently level of where we're not riding the roller coaster and people remember the highs, especially when you play against good talent. And so when you have these good games against where people are watching you, right, then that kind of ingrains in people. But what are you doing against some of these teams on, you're playing a Thursday night game against, somebody that you're both low in the division? How are you coming into those games? Because if you look at him play wise, he's great. He's a technician. I like him. He's a DFW kid, so I'm always going to support DFW kids. To me, he's got the athletic, but he's everything that you want. Mm-hmm. It's just now the next step, if there is one, because like you said, everybody considers him at the minimum a top 10 corner in the NFL. Mm-hmm. Most would argue that, hey, he can kind of push that upper echelon. So how do you get into that consistently, like where we're talking about you as a $20 million corner? That's where it's coming from, is, hey, let's see some consistency. Let's play the full season. Let's play a full season, and let's put it on paper that you can play at a high level consistently throughout the year.
And how do you think Carlton Davis maybe helps that a little bit? A guy who has been a pretty consistent pro throughout his career, been on teams that have obviously been in the Super Bowl. He's won a Super Bowl. He knows what the standard looks like. And he's had that in a way with Jonathan Jones, but I feel like Carlton Davis is a guy who we can learn more from because they have much more similar skill sets.
Yeah, to me, like Jones is really more of a slot type, like a man dominant slot. I really think like with it Carlton Davis, you now have somebody that can kind of step in and they can play, take a lot of the pressure off of Gonzalez just being that guy, right? Like, okay, you're the only guy that we have that can cover. You're going to have to cover now we can play a little bit more, maybe a field boundary, right? Where he's playing away from the nickel. Now we can move Gonzalez away from the nickel, or we can play left and right. Hey, what position do you like playing better? Do you like it more on the left? Do you like it more on the right? Fine, you can have that. So to me, I think that part of it, of limiting the fact that, okay, I have to travel with somebody. I don't think people understand that it is very, very rare to have a travel corner. In fact, if you go and you look at the NFL, there's like only like a couple of them. And it like Pat Surtain is really like the most kind of the only one that like consistently is traveling. Sauce Gardner does not travel. Mm-hmm. And that's because he had DJ Reed on the other side. I think a lot of people don't realize that about him. Denzel Ward with the Browns does not travel. So a lot of these guys that throw out a name of a top corner, and you're probably looking at a guy that doesn't travel. So to me, understanding it's really hard to travel, because when you travel, you're kind of manned up and it changes the defensive structure. It's why a lot of coaches don't like it. When you're the Broncos and you're essentially just playing man coverage or 3-match, which is man coverage on every down, and you're kicking everybody's butt up front. Yeah, it's traveling. You take that guy, and it makes it. That's the whole point of Vrabel, of like cat coverage, because it cleans up the back end. But what if you can't do that? What if you got to play a lot more zone? Okay, well, hey guys, he's gonna lock down this guy. Everybody else has to adjust around him. Well, that's difficult, because what ends up happening is they'll get him in the slot and they'll run him away from him, because they'll know they'll get you in zone just because he's shadow over him. This was a big deal with Ramsey. Okay, you put Ramsey in the slot because that, we're playing the Broncos, or not the Broncos. We're playing the Cowboys, and they got CeeDee Lamb, and we're just going to go ahead and just shadow him wherever he goes. Well, that's great, but we can run CeeDee Lamb across the field now. Now you're in zone, or now you're in chase mode. We got this. So to me, I think alleviating a lot of the pressure of one, having to move maybe he plays on one side of the ball. He doesn't have to, you don't constantly have to be on in some of these games. I think that should help out.
PrizePicks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less, set at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. There's only one series left in the playoffs, and the championship is officially on the line. That means time is running out for you to put your final takes to the test on PrizePicks, the best place to cash in with your favorite sports. And PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this basketball season, this championship season. Which players are going to go off in the postseason? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports takes into real money all season long on PrizePicks. So in the finals, is Halliburton going to have more than 20 points? Is SGA going to have less than 12 assists? More or less, make your picks on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That is code CLNS to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
Best example was the Rams game last year, where everybody was like banging the table. Why is Gonzo not on Puka? Why is he not shadowing? And at the time, I understood when, it felt like John Jones was really not playing well. And you're thinking, all right, yeah, maybe you can adjust. But it's not that easy because the Rams' entire offense is built to put you in situations where if you want to just shadow one guy, you're screwed because they can create miscommunications. Right. It sets up pick plays. If they know what you're going to do, and it's a good offensive coordinator with a scheme and players who are adept at beating it, like with Josh McDaniels when he had Jules and Amendola. So I remember the game that everyone loves, the when they're in Dallas and you see the sun's coming in and it looks so pretty. I remember that game because the Cowboys said we're going to play man no matter what, and Josh was like, bet. I'm just going to run pick play, and they couldn't do anything to stop it. So I'm glad that you brought that up because it sounds very easy saying, oh, just shadow that guy. Yeah. But it's not because of everything that has to happen around it and what smart coordinators can do to take advantage of that. And speaking of smart coordinators, we are now at my favorite part of these shows where I get to ask you about the innovations that you see happening in the league, whether they're on offense or defense. What do you expect to migrate, whether it's from some of the lower levels to the NFL or something that's in the NFL that kind of trickled in that you expect to see more of in 2025?
Yeah, the biggest thing to me is just the proliferation of coverage disguise. Mm-hmm. And that may seem like, okay, that's not that big of a deal, but when you have the Steelers, who are basically one of the most vanilla coverage systems in the NFL, and they're sprinkling in like different ways of playing quarter half. They're doing a bunch of different, I posted a clip the other day of literally yesterday of Minkah Fitzpatrick coming from the weak side all the way to the strong side, and they're rotating into cover 3. I mean, so when you got guys like that, when you start watching the Browns and Jim Schwartz, who is notoriously you talk about a guy that just plays cat coverage all the time and 4 down, man, hey, he's starting to do some of these non-traditional attempts. You look at a guy like Dan Quinn, who's been a Pete Carroll, truther forever. He goes to the Commanders. They're playing quarters. They're playing more non-traditional Tampas. They're doing a bunch of different rotations. They're asking guys to do. You're like, okay, there's something going on. I mean, we had coverage disguise last year at 30%. I think it was right under 30% in the NFL. So almost a third of all snaps were getting some sort of coverage disguise. So to me, that's the number one thing. I don't think that that's going away as more teams are trying to play from a too high shell. That's only going to add into coverage disguises because now, because of the depth, I call them spokes. So you have safety spokes. They can go in a bunch of different directions. And so what it does is, because I'm high, I can go in a bunch of different directions. I can cut off. I call them to use a baseball term, like a backstop. Mm-hmm. Like if we're getting a lot of crosses one way, well, I can sink that guy down. Now I have a backstop. So we can do different things for I mentioned guys running away from me. Okay, well, we can put in backstops because we're playing from a too high shell. I can see the play action a lot longer. So to me, the number one thing is going to be the kind of we're going to disguise what we're doing. We're not just going to sit in the shell and then just show that.
And then it's even scarier when you have the really smart nickels too, because when you have like a Byron Murphy or a Marcus Jones at times, and Miles Bryant did this a lot with the Patriots, where they can also just drop back and they can become the free safety, so that you end up having a deep safety like Peppers, that he comes down and he's in a cloud coverage where he's just jamming because he's a physical guy. He's not even going deep. And then it becomes true positionless football where, like Drake May, you want to talk about how relevant that is. He's a smart player, does a great job of reading space and leverage. His biggest issue last year, I think, was that post-snap recognition where defenses would just rotate, and it's not just, oh, I'm too high and single high.
Right.
It's I'm in one version of too high, and statistically it may show that I'm still in, middle field open, which is what a lot of those split safeties
right.
are. But it's just a different version of that, and it's completely different coverage. And that's not easy, even for a lot of these advanced quarterbacks, when you're going up against, like you said, some of these coordinators where, I know Tom Brady would just have a binder of like the coordinators that he's played, and he's saying, all right, the last time I played them, they did this. Well, if you have Jim Schwartz throwing in a lot of these weird Tampas and you got the nickel going to cover the deep half, it's like, well, shit, man, that's how you catch these guys off guard, because it's not even in the Rolodex.
Well, and so you bring up a really good point of moving safeties around, which would be the second biggest trend, I think, in the NFL is the use of three safeties. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things Belichick at the very end was kind of getting into that. And now you look at, we had a run on safeties last year from all the Ravens guys. If you look at all of the guys, they were all like, hey, we got to find a third safety. We got to get this going. Now you look at it now in year two, post that, and it's like, okay, we're really starting to see these three high structures. The Chargers were probably one of the better examples of it. I mean, the Chiefs last year, I don't think people realize their nickel Shamari Connor was a safety. They also had the Reed kid that they drafted. They would play dime which is 6 DBs with 4 safeties. And you give a guy like Spags 4 safeties, those dudes can go anywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere. And so you're looking at a third down and you're thinking, okay, they have 4 safeties. Where are they going to go? The Vikings are another really good example of Josh Metellus having a guy that literally can be anywhere post snap. He can blitz. He can move to the middle of the field. He can play deep. I have no idea where he's going to go. They can play 5 across. They did a bunch of stuff where they had 5 across, and then they had all 6 guys on the line of scrimmage. So you basically have 2 fences. You have a fence on the line of scrimmage, and you have fence on the sticks. And where are you going to go? Right. So to me, that's the other thing. You look at what like Mike McDonald again is trying to do with that is not have Witherspoon always in the nickel. We got to be able to have a safety that can play down. You go and you look at Houston. They just paid Jalen Petrie. People forget Petrie is also a deep safety. He can play that deep safety spot. Kyle Hamilton, Brian Branch. These are all guys that you're like, okay, yeah, those are really good safeties. Yeah, well, they're also really good in the nickel spot. And now when we can do that, we can match up a lot better. You can't go 12 personnel on us and get us out of a sub package because that's what a lot of teams are trying to do. Like a guy like a Ben Johnson, who's now at Chicago, is trying to get you in the sub package. And then he's like, okay, we'll run the ball because that guy can't really tackle. Or, okay, we're going to pass the ball because now you're in base. And we're going to find that one linebacker that can't cover, and then we're just going to hammer the nail on him. And so I think that, to me, like you look at coverage disguise, it bleeds into, well, we need more safeties. We need more safety bodies. So one, we can maximize our talent outside. Like I'm the Chiefs. I don't want to necessarily kick, I don't want to kick McDuffie in. I think that's why they went and got the Fulton kid from the Chargers, was because they realized like Shamari Connor's great, but he's not an all-pro like McDuffie in the nickel. Because people forget, like McDuffie was an all-pro nickel. He really was an all-pro outside corner. And so that's the thing of like, I talked about that schematic fluidity of like, we can run our whole system through all of these. One of the easiest way to do that is to do a safety because he knows how to play down. He knows how to play back. The transition to nickel isn't that much. And we have a bigger body in the box that is not afraid to kind of mix it up.
All of these are why I'm so glad that Peppers and Duggar are still on the Patriots, because they did all of this stuff. Like, I think one of the most fun plans I watched from Bill was, I think it was 2022 when they played the Bills at home and they were in their reds. That was when you started to see in 3rd and long, Like the way he would get to Tampa was crazy. He would show one thing and they'd be teetering, and you'd think you had an idea of what they might go into. In post-snap, there were literally times where you would have no idea because of how funky. And like you mentioned, the 4 safety packages, they had some of those dime looks where it was 3 down linemen, and then it was just safeties that were basically acting as linebackers, just enforcers in different sides of their zone coverage. And sure, you can know they're in zone and you can have an idea of what you think is going to happen, but those 3 high especially, I know Bill kind of got killed by the Dolphins early doing that, and I don't like it as an early down structure. But if it's those teams where you know they're going to throw the crossers, put 3 down and then drop a couple guys, they don't know where it comes from. And one other thing I also wanted to touch on with the value of the fact that teams can just say, all right, you're coming out in 2 tight ends, I'm coming out with 3 safeties because it's not as much of a disadvantage. How advantageous is it for offenses to have a true fullback? Because studying Josh McDaniels' play action scheme, he loves and he knows if he brings that fullback on and it's a respectable player, you have to play base. Because if you don't, like most teams aren't going to want to get stuck in some version of nickel when there's a fullback, because there's no one who can really is used to taking on that guy. Whereas with a second tight end, usually those guys are just glorified receivers. So how much does it help an offense to have that fullback where you have the versatility to bring out true base formations?
Yeah, if you can force the defense into base and you have a fullback that can catch the ball or is a little bit, is good outside of the box, that's why, for the 49ers, I mean, they kill people just because even Kittle, their tight end, can be an F if you need him to, which is like a flex. So think of like a Travis Kelce, like he can go out and be a receiver if you need to. Well, that gives you a lot of problems. They're essentially forcing you into a sub package, and then they're going to find a way to run the ball. Well, it's kind of the opposite as well. Okay, if I bring a fullback in, I know you're going to get in base. I know you're only going to do certain things out of base, because if you think about it now, what is the least practiced in terms of base versus nickel? Your base defense is probably the least practiced. You probably put it in day one and then you move on from it. A lot of these guys put it in day one so that you have something that if you need to get on the goal line or get in short yardage and then bring out somebody, hey, you know that you're supposed to go in, you know how to line up. But what we're seeing now is like, I'm trying to stay in my sub packages. I mean, you look at like the Rams is a great example of like, they lived in dime. I mean, they're trying to stay in dime as much as they can. And they're like, look, we'll just put our 5 best defensive linemen out. We won't even have a linebacker on the field, but we'll put all these guys out there. And so you're seeing that where other teams are like, okay, let's get to that. So having a true, back to your question, having a true fullback, forcing you into base personnel limits the playbook. And now I can really kind of pick on some of those linebackers. I'm going to find one of those linebackers that's not very good in coverage, and I'm either going to use a tight end against them, I'm going to use a fullback against them, or I'm going to get you in a predictable situation where I'm going to run play action, and now I know that I can get, maybe a big chunk play. So to me, that's really where that fullback now has become a key tool, is really making the defense predictable. If they want to get in nickel, we'll run the ball. And if they don't, then we'll pass the ball, we'll use play action, and we'll attack you down the field, and we'll really stretch you out that way.
No pressure, Brock Lampy, but my football mental health is riding on you, sir. We need that true fullback. Cody, I would love to have you on for the rest of the afternoon. But as I said, you are a busy man, so I got to let you get out of here. But thank you once again so much for coming on. Before I let you go, please remind the people where they can find you, what great stuff you got coming out that we should be looking out for.
Yeah, MatchQuarters.com is basically the hub for everything that I do. You can find, I have archives for long form written content. I have archives for video content. It has links to all of my socials. I post stuff. It feels like almost every day on something. So I'm busy watching football. And if you're into defense, because there's just nothing out there on defense, I got you. I'm that, that beacon out there trying to draw you in. That's me. I got you on MatchQuarters.
And that's why I'm always excited for the show, brother. Thank you again for coming on. And thank you all, as always, for watching. Now, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace, y'all.